Good morning, and welcome everyone to our third Focus Cities webinar of the year. My name is Garrett Fortine with UC Berkeley SafeTrek, and I'm your moderator today. For those not familiar, SafeTrek stands for Safe Transportation Research and Education Center. We are a University of California, Berkeley research center affiliated with the Institute of Transportation Studies and the School of Public Health. Our mission is to reduce transportation-related injuries and fatalities through research, education, outreach, and community service. SafeTrek conducts research, provides technical assistance, and workshops to communities across California, educates the transportation safety professionals of tomorrow, and coordinates major transportation safety programs for the state of California. We are partners with California Walks for our Focus Cities efforts. California Walks is the statewide voice for pedestrian safety and healthy walkable communities for people of all ages and abilities. They provide technical assistance to communities to create more walkable communities, and they also work at the state level to advance opportunities for active transportation. And Jody, we can go to the next slide. We'd also like to acknowledge the support of the California Office of Traffic Safety, who provided a grant through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for this program. We appreciate their dedicated support of community pedestrian and bicycle safety. Before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please be sure to mute your audio. We will be recording both the webinar audio and chat features, and we will make that recording available afterwards. If you do not want to be recorded, please refrain from talking or using the chat feature. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please type them in the chat box on your screen, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We encourage you to ask questions and make use of this feature. With that, I'm excited to introduce today's presenters. Jody Medeiros is the Executive Director of Walk San Francisco, which advocates for streets designed and enforced so that everyone is safe walking in our city. Walk San Francisco was the leading force in San Francisco's adoption of Vision Zero, the goal to end traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2024. Jody sits on the California Zero Death Task Force Advisory Committee and San Francisco's Congestion Pricing Policy Advisory Committee, plus is on the board of Tenderloin Housing Clinic. Evan Oravec is a community organizer with the Central City SRO Collaborative, which works to empower SRO tenants to improve conditions both in and outside their buildings. Evan currently facilitates the Tenderloin Traffic Safety Task Force and sits on San Francisco's Congestion Pricing Policy Advisory Committee. Jennifer Molina is a transportation planner with the SF Municipal Transportation Agency. A former Olympian with a public health and community organizing background, she takes an intersectional approach to her work. Jennifer is responsible for projects in San Francisco that improve the safety and health outcomes on the high injury network. She is also a recent Government Alliance for Racial Equity participant and currently supporting the agency's Racial Equity Action Plan. I'd also like to introduce those of you in the audience. There are over 70 people registered for the webinar today, and we have people from across California, from advocacy groups, city, county, and state agencies, private firms, and universities, and a few folks from outside the state. Finally, I want to briefly mention some resources that we are reading and learning from related to Black Lives Matter and anti-racism in transportation safety work. The Berkeley Institute of Transportation Studies Library has shared this list of resources related to understanding racism in transportation. So there's a link in the chat right there that you can click on and see more resources. One event that we are inadvertently running alongside is the Unurbanist Assembly, led by Dr. Destiny Thomas, who many of you may know. This event, a virtual teach-in dedicated to dialogue and strategies for anti-racist urban planning, started at 9 a.m. today, but runs for 23 hours, so we have plenty of time to catch it. At the end of the webinar today, we will share the link to register and hope to see everyone there. So that's all for our introductions. I'll hand it over to you, Jody.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, and UC Berkeley SafeTrek, as well as California Walks, for this opportunity. My name is Jody Medeiros, and I am the Executive Director of Walk San Francisco, and I'm going to be kicking today's webinar off. And I can't tell you how honored I am to be with you here today, sharing this work, and this is definitely a work in progress. So who is Walk San Francisco? I think it's important to start here. We're an organization, we're a nonprofit that's been in existence since 1998, and we are the only pedestrian advocacy organization making our streets in San Francisco safe and enjoyable, because we really believe that San Francisco can and should be the most pedestrian friendly in the city and the nation for everyone. And I always like to have here, it's a nice reminder, we are all pedestrians and we all deserve safe streets. It doesn't matter how you get around, we are all pedestrians. And we work on policies, we mobilize, we train and educate, we host events to advocate for the re-engineering of our streets. And we have been San Francisco's leader on Vision Zero. We helped the city adopt the Vision Zero program, and we have a 10-year goal of having 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2024. And we lead the Vision Zero Coalition and Families for Safe Streets. We definitely take a safe systems approach to this work, as you see there on the right side of your screen, with a focus on engineering change, because we know that everybody is going to make a mistake. We need to do our best to protect the most vulnerable. We all have a shared responsibility, and we need to do all we can to be proactive and make sure in how we approach street design. And safe streets are only going to be possible if we raise up the voices of those who are most impacted by traffic violence and empower them to be activists in the Safe Streets movement. And that's why we are here today to talk about what we're doing in the Tenderloin. And this quickly here is a reminder, while we are already 5 years into our Vision Zero goal, we still have a really long way to go in San Francisco. In 2019, we had one of our most deadly years with 18 people and 1 person on a bike lost their lives in traffic crashes, and it was definitely one of the worst years for the most vulnerable in San Francisco. This is where we work. So our purple lines here are our high injury network. These are the 13% of our San Francisco streets where we're seeing 75% of our traffic crashes. And what we're seeing is that our high injury tend to be in neighborhoods that are lower income, communities of color, children, immigrants, and older adults reside. And where you see there on the map arrow, this is our Tenderloin neighborhood. It's small and compact, but as you can also see, every single street in the Tenderloin is on the high injury network. And this is why Walk San Francisco has been dedicated and has been doing a lot of advocacy efforts to make streets more like neighborhood streets to reflect the residents, and really change them from where they've been to hopefully streets where people are not being hurt and killed. So to put on some perspective in terms of the dangers and where we are, this is a map with severe and fatal crashes over the past 5 years. We've had 60 severe and fatal crashes from 2014 to 2018. We're still waiting for the data for 2019. This is, but we know that 2019 was not great either at all. It was terrible. We had 4 pedestrian fatalities in the Tenderloin alone. And I think that it's important to know that these are residents, but also these are non-residents. These are people visiting the neighborhood as well. And as you can see, crashes are happening on every street corner. Injury crashes, this is equally as terrible. We're seeing about 200 injury crashes every single year, and most intersections are home to multiple injury crashes, and some saw over 30 over the past 5 years. So this is a crash every other month at each intersection, and that is just deplorable and not acceptable. And again, we don't have 2019 numbers yet, but we don't think that this trend has gone down despite some work in this neighborhood. And therefore, it just shows us that we really need to double down and do even more in this neighborhood on making our streets safe. Because let me tell you a little bit about who's living here and the importance of this neighborhood. So this is the Tenderloin. Rich in history, arts, culture, very inclusionary neighborhood, working class neighborhood, and incredibly diverse. The Tenderloin is one of the most diverse and dense neighborhoods in our city. It's a high concentration of residents, businesses, and social service agencies. And the thing that makes it really tragic is that we have a series of one-way streets leading from downtown and using this neighborhood as a high volume cut-through neighborhood versus streets that represent the businesses, residents, and neighborhood features for the population. As you can see here, our youth and our seniors are very high proportion than any other place in San Francisco. And we have incredible diversity. We see that 21% is more diverse than any other neighborhoods, and Latinx has at least 20% of that here in this neighborhood. And coupled with that, we are seeing that this is a much lower income neighborhood. And the thing that I think is important to also see here is that a third of our city's single room occupancy housing stock is within this quarter-mile radius. And that's why we have Evan here with us today. He is part of CCSRO and very involved in the work here that we bring. In addition, this neighborhood also houses or unhouses the most homeless population. And Jennifer and Evan will be talking later about the community's COVID crisis and what the SFMTA and the city agencies are doing to help the unhoused through this crisis. And Walk San Francisco is dedicated to seeing that these streets become safe neighborhood streets that all the residents deserve. We're very grateful that we've been invited into this community, to be part of this community, to be part of the Tenderloin Traffic Safety Task Force. We've been with the task force since the beginning, and we'll continue to support this effort in any way we can to achieve Vision Zero. From there, I'd really like to turn it over to my partner on this, Evan Arabic. And I'll turn it over to you, Evan.
Great. Thanks, Jody, for that introduction and for all the great information. I just want to start off by briefly telling you guys a little bit about the Central City SRO Collaborative and a tiny bit more about myself, only because, as you guys have noticed, I and the organization I'm with are the only ones that don't have a direct, obvious connection to traffic safety work. So the Central City SRO Collaborative generally has a mission to build community morale and enhance the quality of life for low-income residents in SRO, single-room occupancy hotels in the Tenderloin and south of Market. As Jody said, a third of the entire city's SRO housing stock is in the Tenderloin, which has historically been really important and shapes the neighborhood and its culture. But a key thing here is the organization has an understanding that, you know, it's one thing to help the tenants improve conditions within their building, but if the moment they walk outside their front door, you know, they're in constant danger and the streets are a mess, it's only so helpful. So there's a real understanding in the model that we want to help empower the community to improve conditions both within their hotels and around them as well in the community as a whole. And so what do I bring to this? I mean, you know, I came to CCSRO because I had a background in tenant work. I'd done tenant advocacy through law firms prior to after college. And I also had a background in community organizing on a number of issues, just whatever issues were going on in the communities I was in at the time. Most recently, during a Fulbright scholarship in Colombia, I was working with Venezuelan refugees and helping engage in the community around that very pressing issue at the time. Just to highlight that, to me, a good community organizer and a good community member is one who's helping create positive change in their community around issues that really matter. And in the Tenderloin, one of them is traffic safety, which is highlighted by the statistics that Jody brought up. So that being said, let's get right into sort of the history of the task force here. So I think it's important to highlight that it came together relatively organically. Since it was clear to everyone that too many people were being, tragically killed or injured just trying to walk the streets. There were several organizations already engaging on the issue in various different ways. Within the community, you of course had my organization, CCSRO, but you also had organizations like the Tenderloin Community Benefits District, which has its Safe Passage program, which has stipended volunteers who help escort children to safely cross the streets from school programs and after school programs all week. You've also got organizations like the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, which has an active community organizing department, which also realized it was an issue and was involved. And then you've got organizations like Walk SF and the Bike Coalition, which are of course not specific to the Tenderloin, but they bring their specific focus on traffic and pedestrian safety to bear in the Tenderloin, and I think complement really well working with the neighborhood focused organizations. So we'll get into kind of the early work and how this came together in a little bit. But first, let's get into how the task force itself actually works, sort of the nuts and bolts here. So first, the structure. It's important to mention that the sort of bread and butter here of the task force is its monthly meetings. So it's the fourth Thursday of every month. The meetings generally run about an hour and a half. And an important thing to note is that the SFMTA, and you'll hear from Jennifer shortly, participates generally every other meeting. That's an important point here, because I think it creates space for the community to come together and discuss specific issues, including its relationship with SFMTA and different things it wants to do with SFMTA in its own time. And then when the SFMTA is in the meeting, it can be a little more focused on how the collaboration is going forward. Although it's also important to mention that there's obviously open communication even on the off months with SFMTA. I'm fortunate to be able to communicate with Jennifer fairly frequently. So the monthly meetings rotate like that, but the communication remains. In the meetings themselves, you've got the facilitator, which is a role I have the pleasure of having right now, which basically means that I have to, run the meetings, keep them on time. I help put the agenda together with my co-facilitator, who is, his name is Eric, and he's with the TLCBD. And the two of us kind of help make sure that the task force is running smoothly, get the agenda out, ask for agenda items. And during COVID times, we're helping get the Zoom link out because our monthly meetings have, of course, needed to go to Zoom during this. But I also want to say that this facilitation model is, like the task force itself, is still relatively new. And over these last 2 years, it's sort of grown and shaped a little bit, including this idea of the 6-month rotation. So I took the role of facilitator over from Jody. What I meant, I guess 2-3 months ago now. I don't know with COVID times, and the idea is, that every 6 months, a new member of the task force would take over and kind of and have that kind of role in the leadership to kind of have some buy-in there, as well as the co-facilitator. And so that as that kind of expresses with this changing nature of the facilitation, I think there are some challenges in the structure. I mean, as we're figuring out how we want it to be run, do we want the facilitator to be a face, more like a chair? Do we want someone who's just helping keep things running? We've got growing pains. I mean, as the group has become more successful and it's kind of grown and it's who's regularly participating, you've naturally got more opinions at the table. And I think that's really healthy, and I think we all do. But it, of course, like any organization, means that you have to find out how to make that work. How are certain decisions made? Is there voting? How many people is enough? And then, if we're going to do this rotating facilitation, how big is the role? Since most organizations in the Tenderloin are not specific to traffic safety, it's a time commitment to to create a role where they really have to be spending a lot of time on it. So I think, I don't want us to sugarcoat the challenges here, but I think that it's really important that the group has been flexible and changing in good faith as we look to continue to work and expand. So going forward, I think we can go into a discussion of sort of the work that the task force has done through this structure. And I think we can just jump straight to really the beginning, which is a key moment in the Tenderloin in the last few years was the Safer Taylor Street project, which is a large, pretty capital intensive kind of redo of a major thoroughfare in the neighborhood, which is Taylor Street. And as you see in this picture here, this rendering of what it could be, it could really reshape, what it looks like and how safe it is for pedestrians. And it's got a relatively hefty price tag. And when that was coming together in 2017, and when community engagement process was happening, the task force did not exist. But many of the organizations that I've already talked about were trying to engage in the process because they were trying to be involved in this neighborhood project. And as that process was coming together, this served as a sort of catalyst for these groups to finally come together and say, why don't we formalize some sort of group to make sure that the community has a space to come together and discuss traffic safety, pedestrian safety issues, and make sure that the voices of the community and the residents are heard. And so that's why you see here on the left the first letter that the task force sent to the director of the SFMTA at the time, Ed Reskin, basically saying that we would like to formalize some sort of task force. We want the SFMTA to support it, and some specific asks about road diets and reducing the speed of vehicles in the neighborhood to make it safer. Sort of expressing some of the values and signaling to the city that the community was ready for this and wanted to partner with the city to make the city, the neighborhood safer. Which brings us to the next part of our history here, which is going into 2019. As a result of that first letter, the SFMTA did acknowledge the community's ask to form a task force and did offer partnership and committed a planner to work with us, which is why Jennifer's here. So as the task force became more formal in 2019, more organizations got involved. As you can see in our second letter here, the number of organizations who signed on was bigger. But I think it's also a shift in what the group was working on. As it came together around Taylor Street and some issues broadly about asks, by 2019, we had put together a letter focusing on long-term investment in the neighborhood's infrastructure, specifically the CIP, which is the capital improvement projects. So basically asking the SFMTA to commit to large, infrastructure upgrades to make the neighborhood safer and to engage them in that process, which has been largely successful. We have gotten commitments in the next 5-year SFMTA CIP cycle for about $20 million in infrastructure upgrades in the neighborhood, which really could see the streets of the Tenderloin looking fairly different in the coming years, which is overdue. And it also highlights the importance of the continued work to stay on this process and to make sure that the budget continues to reflect these values and that the projects go forward, including several quick builds which are planned in the neighborhood to upgrade different streets like Golden Gate. And then I finally just want to bring us up to where we are now. I mean, I think once we were focusing on the CIP and then COVID hit. And that was also around the time that I took over facilitation from Jody. And it presented real challenges. One, it was, only the second real facilitation transfer we had done. And COVID, as we all know, made things very different. And while we used to work on a monthly basis, worried about budgets and big projects, COVID changed things by the day. You saw a two-pronged crisis in the Tenderloin. Since it's so dense, there was concerns about having space to walk on the streets. Combine that with the huge uptick in the number of unhoused people. on the streets of the Tenderloin, up to, by some metrics, about 450 to 500 tents on certain days. So you really had narrow streets, and then sidewalks really clogged with tents. And so you had people unable to get around. That's when the SFMTA announced on the citywide level its Slow Streets program, the idea of closing down certain street space to give people space to walk. And the task force decided to try to get involved in that to make sure that the Tenderloin could get extra street space. This map here is a map that actually members of the task force, working with the supervisor for District 6, Matt Haney, working with his office to get firm proposals for which streets the community would like to see more space on and why. It ended up being a proposal for Turk and Jones, a north, south, east, west corridor to do some parking removal or lane closure to kind of extend sidewalks to make sure people felt they could walk around the neighborhood in a socially distant and safe manner. And so it really did present challenges because it was quick work, and it required subgroups and constant communication and an advocacy on the city level. And it did include another letter to the director of the SFMTA, and we had 16 organizations sign on to that. And I think it's shown real fruit. I think we're looking at some near-term changes to the streets of the Tenderloin during COVID. So I think that kind of brings me to the end of my part of the presentation here, and I have the pleasure of handing it over to our great SFMTA partner in this, Jennifer Molina.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Jody, for your presentation. Again, I'm honored to be here again as part of this collaborative approach, and so again, just kind of understanding that this is a work in progress, and I'm really grateful to be part of this this community and work that we're doing. And so really quickly, I just wanted to introduce kind of where I fit into the SFMTA. MTA is a very large, I think the second largest agency in SF behind the Department of Public Health. And so I'm working in more of the DOT branch. It's called Sustainable Streets of the MTA. We also have a transit branch, more along operations. And so just letting you just kind of understanding kind of the role the MTA plays, but also the size of it. And so I work in a division called Livable Streets. And so our focus is on creating safe and inviting streets and sidewalks for those who walk and bike, but also we're a key group in delivering Vision Zero projects, where we're working across divisions, not just within livable streets, but with transit engineering and curb management. Just wanted to highlight, I don't want to get too much into this slide, but I think Evan really highlighted it in a very concise and true way. Is we have projects happening or have happened in Tenderloin in the past, some that have been, I think, overall quite successful. But I think really paying tribute to the Safer Taylor Street project and the staff and community partners that worked with that project is really being a catalyst to driving the want and need for quicker, more effective traffic safety changes. I think that's kind of where we get into why I'm here, and kind of our shift in approach and how we're working in the Tenderloin community. Next slide, please. So really, again, talking about my role, I was brought on in 2019 to kind of support the community, as co-leading and supporting the task force, but also being a full-time community planner in the neighborhood. So really, these are just a few highlights of just how I'm going about the work in terms of my roles and responsibilities. I think number one has been listening, a lot of listening and responding to mobility issues and concerns. Again, while I work and we talk about walking and bicycling, but I'm also have kind of become a liaison to other mobility issues and concerns that while I cannot, for example, transit issues that have come up, I'm able to connect community members to staff that I know working on those issues. So that's important, listening and responding. Also learning. I think there's a lot of experts and great history in the Tenderloin around community organizing and around just overall advocacy. And so me just taking a seat back and learning how best to engage with the community. And that means us as planners and engineers not assuming and not going in with our toolkits of how we want to do outreach, and really taking that step back and figuring out what is best and what the community needs. One of the main kind of tenets of how I go about my work is building relationships and forming partnerships. I think that is pretty much the ground of my work, is connecting with community groups and organizations. I think one thing that has happened over the past year and I'm excited for is not only building relationships, but also forming partnerships. And so just really highlighting some of the work that we look forward to doing with groups like the People's Congress, which is a coalition of residence-based serving organizations, to really focus on how to work with them and how to support and center their work, including paying them for their work, and how that fits into more of a neighborhood strategy and long-term goals for what mobility means to the Tenderloin, to working with TLCBD and their Safe Passage group, and really thinking about ways to support their group and using their expertise to think about how we would want to expand or support the work that they're doing on the daily as they're working and engaging with community at the intersection and street level. And of course, building relationships also includes building relationships with other city agencies. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that, like, we do sometimes work in our silos, and really understanding the need to the intersectionality of our work, and also understanding that we need to be talking to DPW, SF Planning, Workforce Development, among other city agencies that are doing work and needing to have a really sense of how our work can continue forward together. And I guess with the shift of approach, having me as a full-time community planner is obviously, of all these things, is really making sure our agency is accountable for the commitments that we're making and have made. I think that includes from some of the commitments include a gap analysis that we were able to do last year in terms of just getting a sense of existing conditions out there. Evan had talked about really talking about like infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure, and kind of in some ways deplorable conditions of some of the infrastructure out in the streets, from traffic signals to lighting. And so really getting that information to the task force, among other things like the capital improvement plan, and really focusing on what's next for the community, including a neighborhood strategy, and really thinking about not a street to street approach, but really holistically of what is the plan for the neighborhood as we move forward. Next slide. And just really, again, when I think about, like, as a community planner and how we're coming in and kind of stepping away and really thinking about the values that are leading our work and my work, and I really want to show it in 3 ways. And so one of the core principles is really the recognition of our city's racist history and the role local government played in that history, but also how we can be part of rectifying these transportation inequities. And I think that really is how I am leading the work, and how, when I am working with staff people and bringing in other staff people into the projects, is that we're really looking at through a racial equity lens. I think that that can be a whole presentation on itself, but really, I think overall, just asking the hard questions about what are the outcomes of the projects and policies that we're talking about. How are we engaging people in the past? Are there opportunities to expand and improve that engagement? Who benefits and is burdened by these projects or proposals? And what are the strategies to mitigate unintended consequences? I think there's an accountability and evaluation that we as city agencies and local government have to be stepping up. And that's one thing that I'm really trying to make sure that value is playing out in my work here. Another thing is showing up, listening, and follow community and lead. Understanding that whether we consider ourselves experts to topics, I think really taking that and really moving that concept away as us as experts, and really looking to the community as experts. I think that's been one of my main focuses, is really going and showing up at meetings and forums, maybe not even necessarily having to do with transportation, but really listening to what is happening in the Tenderloin, the history of the Tenderloin, and how organizers go about their work. I just have a quick photo here. It says Safe Passage AM Shift. That's just where, this is a group that really is doing a lot of work in creating safe passage for people, particularly youth and seniors, getting to essential needs in school. And so it was a great place where I can shadow. I followed the lead. I just kind of watched and how these great safety captains are doing the work in the Tenderloin. And again, that's just showing that we're showing up, we're listening, and really trying to understand the greater needs that the community needs. And the last thing is about kind of entering us as planners and engineers is really shifting this less about Project X and really more about serving the neighborhood. So there's plenty of examples that I can provide, but I think really just understanding and hearing, instead of talking about a project or pushing an agenda that oftentimes transfer agencies have. I think one thing was a great example is that a lot of community members wanted to just talk to an engineer. I think we use lingo and we use words that are, traffic analysis and lead pedestrian intervals and all this stuff. And so we were able to have a nice coffee chat with an engineer and showed up to really ask questions and for community to be listened to. I think there's a lot of questions and I think that ongoing conversation is important. Next slide. Just really quickly about funding. I know there are local government people here listening. This work takes money, and so really just getting commitments from your leaders and management. We were able to fund most of my work in early planning efforts around existing data collection and really helping support the work of the task force and beyond was through some local funds, our population growth Prop B, and then we were really excited to receive a Caltrans Sustainable Planning grant, which was around $300,000. And so really using this money, really shifting in how we're using this money and thinking about how we're supporting commitments that we've made, including the 2020 quick builds, and then also leading into more of a neighborhood strategy of working with the community to create this strategy and vision. So that includes paying CBOs and community members for their work and their expertise to support and lead this work. I think that's important to recognize is that is a goal of ours, and we'll continue to formulate these partnerships and make sure that that people are being paid for their time, but also that they're leading the work. Next slide. Just overall challenges, I think for the past few years, I think it's just really our challenge has been capacity to deliver changes. As I am one planner. I don't have a team of planners and engineers supporting me all the time, but I think overall, I think that's something that we have to be make that realization that we don't have 10 staff working on call just with me. And so just understanding that and what that means for delivering changes. Another challenge, and I don't think it's like a bad challenge, but inclusive community planning, I think that's important, but also that takes time and resources. So making sure that that's something that my leaders and management are taking seriously as I report back, but then also that that we're serious about that and what does that mean. Again, an ongoing challenge has always been commitment and coordination with multiple city agencies. One of the things that came out of our existing conditions report is lighting. Lighting is abysmal in the Tenderloin, particularly at intersections, and how that relates to safety at many levels. And so that's something we're really bringing in our Public Utility Commission into the conversation and getting them to really respond and make commitments to improving lighting in the Tenderloin. And I think one challenge that I think has been part of on all of our minds now, whether in our personal and professional lives, is the pandemic. And I think right now we're seeing that play out in the Tenderloin. It's devastating, and not only the inequities that have been there for many years, but the fact that it has exacerbated what is happening. And so really, I think that in the next several weeks to months to years is us responding to that challenge. So really what's next really quickly, and I look forward to asking or answering any more questions, is pivoting our work. And so I am now part of the emergency response team in the Tenderloin. And so myself and a team of engineers and a few planners will be working and responding to a plan that was set forth to really respond to the issues happening around the pandemic and homelessness. And so really us as a support agency, not leading with a project, but really focusing on meeting the needs that Evan had talked about really trying to get actionable steps now. And so that means creating a network of sidewalk extensions. That means taking out parking, travel lane closures. And that really is for the social distancing, helping alleviate there are a lot of tent and encampments on sidewalks currently. So really trying to create that space so people in the Tenderloin predominantly are walking and taking transit. And so that is something that's important, is creating more space for people to leave their homes, leave their places of where they are and actually get to what they need to get to, including their work, medical appointments. So that is our priority right now, is doing that in the coming weeks. And again, supporting emergent needs. I think, again, we're a support agency in this response, and we'll be working closely with other agencies around trying to create more space for hygiene and food access spaces, safe sleeping sites. So really being that agency that can quickly remove parking, think about temporary closures. I know Slow Streets has come up, and just really how does that fit into the emergency response, and how the Tenderloin really wants to use these tools to really focus on what is needed now. We're in emergency mode right now, and I think that is something that we need to take seriously. And then the last two things is just really continuing neighborhood engagement. Beyond COVID, I think it's important that our staff and myself are continuing to check in with neighborhood groups and partners to see how they're doing, but also keep the momentum around the demands and actions that are needed around traffic safety, and then also revisiting our commitments. I really don't know where the emergency response work will lead us, but I do know that we need to stay true to the commitments we made. And so those may change, may need to pivot. I'm not too sure, but I think that's up to the Tenderloin community to really help inform us on those next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now, and Evan as well. This is Jody, and I look forward to using this time. We have about 15 minutes or so to dive into the Q&A, and I believe that Garrett, you're gonna lead us through that. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat bar, and we are gonna do our best to get to as many questions as we can in the next 15 minutes. So again, please add your questions to the chat.
Sure, all right, thank you, Jody. Okay, so we do have some questions in the chat. I've received some questions via email as well, so we'll definitely want to balance all of those. So I wanted to start off with, we discussed a little bit about how the task force is meeting via Zoom now, monthly, etc. I wanted to hear about some of the other ways that the task force's work might have changed given COVID. And I don't know what that looks like, so.
I'm sure I'm sure all three of us have thoughts on that. I mean, I will briefly just say that I think what I have felt has been one of the immediate changes, other than just transferring to Zoom, is as I tried to hammer home in my slide, but generally when you're talking about street changes and projects, the horizons are, maybe at the months level in terms of changes and updates and input. And because of the nature of the crisis, things just started to change by the day. When we were thinking about how can we open up more sidewalk space for pedestrians in the neighborhood to be safe and leave socially distantly, the city was still trying to figure that out too. The Emergency Operations Center, and then they would say the SFMTA is going to do it, and SFMTA says the EOC, and it's a crisis challenges structure, and so it challenged the task force because it wasn't enough to have monthly meetings. It required us working between those on the side and coordinating and doing a letter on a quicker time scale than before, and so it's just a different type of work really, and it also has a new sort of intensity to it in the public health aspect. The thought that now needing more pedestrian space was also a matter of helping prevent a worse outbreak of a pandemic. So.
And this is Jody. I'd like to add, before COVID, we were planning a walk with Director of Transportation, Jeff Tumlin, to walk around the areas and really show him the traffic challenges that we've had in the Tenderloin and point out some things. He's new to the job. He offered to come out and walk with the task force. So we were planning that for April, and that had to get delayed. And it's been a huge shift from traffic safety and Vision Zero to just the humanitarian crisis that we have on the streets. And so, but as Evan said, the task force has been an amazing asset to the city to be able to gather a group quickly who already have a relationship and have already been working together, and to get quick response and quick answers, and know that there's going to be community buy-in. So despite the fact that we are in a pandemic, having the task force together has been an incredible asset to the community, in my opinion.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. So now I wanted to jump to some specific questions, and I'm going to try to combine a couple different questions here because it sounds like it's like a locally sort of important question that several people have, which is about the quick build projects in the Tenderloin. A couple of commenters have asked sort of, are these taking some time? How are these like responding to the COVID crisis? And then one commenter adds, obviously, as things reopen, right, this hopeful, reopening, traffic is about to start. So like, how are some of these quick build projects in the Tenderloin moving along?
I can answer that question, or at least try to. Thanks, that's a great question. I think at this point, yes, the quick build projects that were planned for the Tenderloin this year were two that we had committed to, and that was Leavenworth and Golden Gate. I think those are two commitments that that at this point we're unsure of because of the COVID response that that our team has been pulled into to really respond to the sidewalk widening. And so at this point we're putting energy into two other corridors, which is Jones and Turk, and that really came from the supervisor's office and community groups to really respond to what is happening now on the streets. So in terms of quick build projects, those are not off the table. I think at this point is just we have pivoted our staff to focus on the current needs. And so our goal really, and my hope is to continue with the quick build projects and keep moving those forward. The goal would be this year to complete those other two, but at this point we don't know. I think we're going to have to reassess that in the next few weeks. But again, that's a commitment that we made to the community. So we need to have these conversations about those two streets. And then what's next? I mean, that's a whole other question. We know every street in the Tenderloin is on the high injury network. You could place a finger on the map and say, let's do a quick build project there. And we would be like, yes, that would make sense. But at this point is really trying to do it in a way where we're being intentional, because quick build projects are faster than larger capital projects. But there's still an outreach and planning aspect to that, and design, and we also need to get them approved by our fire and other agencies. And so I don't know if I've answered your question. We are committing to quick build in the Tenderloin. That is not something that we're moving away from. We're just in the next several weeks going to be focusing on supporting our emergency response and working with other agencies to meet those needs.
All right, thank you. And I see that there was a follow-up question specifically about some of those projects. So I want to say that maybe folks might be able to email you directly and ask specific questions about specific.
Yeah, that'd be great. My email's there. I'm happy to email them back or have a conversation.
Fantastic. All right. So I'll move on to another question that I know we had and someone else has mentioned about, and I don't know if it's related or not, the slow streets, and someone says that Oakland did slow streets months ago, and they suggest that slow streets might have a positive impact in the Tenderloin, considering sort of what Evan said about the tents and sidewalk space. So I wanted to ask broadly about slow streets in the Tenderloin, and then how that outreach to the community has looked like, and if there has been outreach to the community about slow streets, how have community members responded?
I mean, I guess I can. I mean, I think Jennifer would also probably be a good asset on this one. But I mean, I think, you know, early on when Slow Streets was announced in San Francisco, it you know, it seemed like what we would be pushing for. But I think it quickly became clear that the exact parameters of what Slow Streets means might not be the perfect fit for the Tenderloin. You know, slow streets, at least in San Francisco, is often meant certain primarily residential corridors, and closing them down entirely to all non-residential traffic. And it's just really what we've been looking at in the Tenderloin is more sidewalk expansion instead of a whole closure, at least on a long-term basis. Just because, for better or for worse, that most of the streets are not, they are used as corridors to other parts of the city. So it's a matter of like making it, and in terms of emergency services access. So, you know, there's often issues with the fire department, making sure that they can access certain streets in certain ways in the Tenderloin. So it's sort of the idea of slow streets, of creating more space on the streets right now, is what we're aiming for, but it has become clear that it's not quite the mechanism that we have been working on with the SFMTA in terms of expanding sidewalks.
I can also add a little bit to that. Evan, I think summarized it really well in terms of in context of the Tenderloin. I know Slow Streets, I'm not part of that program, but I actually just came back from leave about a few weeks ago and learning a little bit more about the implementation of Slow Streets. So I do know from like engineering perspective, I know the Tenderloin is difficult for slow streets given the higher traffic volumes and speeds in the street grid. Tenderloin is one-way street couplets, consecutive signals. So these are some of the things I think that came up that were really hard for that team in terms of how to prioritize. But then also at the same time as Slow Streets was coming out, the Mayor Breed had initiated the assessment for the Tenderloin, really looking at what is the plan as a COVID response and what agencies need to be part of that solution. And so I don't think Slow Streets is necessarily not going to be helping and supporting our efforts and response efforts. I think there are other options that may be of interest to the community that I know conversations are happening around the concept of share streets, temporary closures, looking at ways to extend sidewalk space. I think that's happening, has been a number one kind of priority, is really trying to look at ways of removing parking and or expanding some space, taking traffic lanes out and really doing that. So I don't think Slow Streets off the table. I think what had happened is where our response really, we wanted to go and work with our EOC and really focus on prioritizing those needs first. But I think I see some comments, and I think the slow street concept is one of the tools that can be used in the Tenderloin, and that will be an ongoing conversation.
I'd also just quickly say, I'm also seeing the comments. I would love full closures. Okay, I think I think it's I'm hearing these comments, and I think it has been you know, a big back and forth in the community, because it's not just in terms of what works on the city level, but you know, there's different opinions within the community and different organizations and residents about what they want done with the streets. And I think that's another point to express that, even within the task force and within the community, there's differing views about, how to modify the streets. And so it's certainly an ongoing conversation. I mean, we're in the middle of the pandemic, but yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. And it sounds like there's some of the barriers to that we're talking about, or some of the issues that we're talking about, are connected with some of the fundamental engineering and infrastructure questions that are sort of the reason that we've seen all these fatalities and serious injuries in the Tenderloin, obviously even before this crisis began. And so we have a couple of questions that get at sort of perhaps these fundamental questions. One question is, in addition to widening sidewalks for safe essential activities, which is great, how is SFMTA working to slow traffic speeds in the Tenderloin through engineering?
I can take that question. I think from if we're just kind of going pre-COVID, or kind of what our focus has been in the Tenderloin in slowing speeds down, I think one of the major kind of physical, the infrastructure that we're seeing as a grid in the streets in the Tenderloin is that a lot of the north to south streets, they're overbuilt. We have these one-way couplets that are literally 3 lanes of vehicle traffic, and so one of the ways that we want to, obviously with community buy-in and conversation, is really looking at that road diet, is really taking out that extra lane, knowing the current volumes that we're seeing. Well, the pre-COVID volumes right now, we're not collecting data on traffic volumes, but really what we were seeing before last year is the ability to take lanes out and still have a street that is functioning and allowing traffic to move, but also really slowing down traffic and creating that friction. So that's one thing that I know that we'll be continuing to push for. And then also, I think there's also some signal work that needs to happen, some retiming. I think one of the things that has come up as well is that when we're talking about the historical, structural, and institutional racism of our city planning, is also the fact that we are working with infrastructure within the Tenderloin that hasn't been invested in for many years. Traffic signals are one of those, where we just recently did a retiming across the neighborhood, but we're really dealing with infrastructure signal hardware that dates to the 30s and 40s. And so these are things that I think from an engineering perspective we have to consider. So when we are thinking about timing streets to slow down traffic coming tools, we also have to think about what the challenges of some of that work. And so I think that gets to kind of more of getting advocacy around influencing our CIP, and really figuring out how we can rectify the inequities that we're seeing across this neighborhood, and really think about how we need to have commitments by our leaders. And I am working for a city government, I do see that play out, but really trying to have us to really put more focus and resources into the neighborhood. And that's been an ongoing struggle and friction for me, because I see where they're coming from, and then I'm also, a city government, and what my role is in communicating that, and the importance of making sure that we're prioritizing this community.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. And I know we've had a lot more questions in the chat. We aren't able to address everything because we are pretty much out of time today. So as folks have said, as our panelists have said, as folks in the chat have said, this urgent conversation is definitely continuing. It's definitely real life happening right now. So I would urge folks to continue to reach out via email to continue to work through all of these topics and answer these questions. But we are out of time today. So I wanna thank all of our presenters. Thank you, Jody, Evan, and Jennifer, for your time on this and for sharing your knowledge and experiences. I encourage everyone to take what you've learned today and apply it to your work. A reminder, we will have these slides as well as a link to the recording of the webinar available to you soon, along with the contact information for our speakers. I see someone asking in the chat about that. We will email out a YouTube link, I believe, to everybody who registered, so you will get that in your email. Finally, I'll remind everybody about Dr. Destiny Thomas's Unurbanist Assembly happening concurrently. I'll share the registration link in the chat right now. Oh, that's not going to everyone. All right, oh no. Okay, I'm sorry. Here we go. There's the link for everybody in the chat. We encourage everyone to join her virtual teach-in. Thank you so much for sharing part of your day today. Thank you for all of your questions. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.